So recently, one of the young moms in the parish shared with me an experience that a lot of you trying to or did work from home with young kids running about could probably relate to. That one day, her 6-year-old little son and her 2-year-old little daughter were playing peacefully in the family room. So she thought she could get some work done and sat on the couch and opened up her laptop. Well, after a few minutes, she heard her son start wailing. And as she looked up, saw her son there with his little sister, the handful of his hair in her hand. So she quickly jumped up and massaged the little girl's hand open and tried to explain to her son, Jimmy, she doesn't understand or realize that when you pull someone's hair, it hurts. So the kids went back to playing and she went back to her laptop. A few minutes more passed by, and this time she heard the little girl screaming. And as she looked up, there was the little girl with her brother with a big fistful of her hair. And she said, Jimmy, I just explained to you. She doesn't understand that when you pull someone's hair, it hurts. The little boy looked up at her and says, she does now. We all learn in life at some point, usually when we're children, that there are consequences to our actions, good or bad. And today, the readings remind us that there are also consequences in God's eyes to our actions. Because the Lord expects certain things from us. And just like the tenant farmers in the first reading in the gospel, the Lord God expects us to bear fruit. And as I said at the beginning of Mass, the readings today share that common theme of a vineyard. God is the gracious vineyard owner who's planted the vines, built a wall, put up a hedge, dug the winepress, given everything the tenants could possibly need to produce an abundant harvest. But yet, as we hear in both readings, they don't do that. In the first reading, Isaiah prophesies that ancient Israel, the vineyard of the Lord, as we sang in that psalm, has rejected God as their owner. They have failed to produce the abundant harvest God is looking for. And as a result, there will be consequences, for God will hand over his vineyard to someone else. And in the gospel, Jesus is dealing with the same problem. But now it's addressed to you and me, because we are those new people who have been entrusted with the vineyard of the church. And the gospel is a powerful warning that just like for ancient Israel, God is expecting an abundant harvest from you and me. And the readings this weekend are a wake-up call to realize what God is expecting and to ask ourselves how we're doing in living up to those expectations. And that's not always something we like to think about, because after all, we live in a culture and a world that loves to transfer blame to someone else, to never take responsibility for my actions or lack thereof. And this reading reminds us it doesn't work that way with God. This reading's also a wake-up call, because in our busy, fast-paced 21st century world, sometimes it's so all-consuming, just the day-to-day things we got to get done, that sometimes we lose sight of the bigger picture. We lose sight of producing the fruits God is looking for. Since these readings are meant to be a wake-up call, let's dive in and learn the 3 important lessons these readings can teach you and me about how we are or are not living up to what God expects from us. Lesson number 1 we learn from these readings is the importance of gratitude. That's the fatal mistake that the tenant farmers make in both readings. They fail to remember all that has been given to them: the vineyard, the tower, the winepress, the hedge. They own none of it. It's all been given to them as a gift. And how often do we do the same exact thing? The fatal flaw of the tenant farmers is that instead of having an attitude of stewardship to the vineyard, they have an attitude of ownership. And that's a good question to ask ourselves. Which attitude do we have? Because when I have an attitude of stewardship, I realize that everything is a gracious gift from God. My talents, my blessings, my abilities, my work ethic, etc., etc. I'm not responsible for any of it. It's a gift from him. And when I view that with an attitude of stewardship, then I realize that those gifts have been given to me by God to produce fruit. Not the fruits of the world, not the fruits I'm looking for, but the fruits he's looking for. But we can also have an attitude like the tenant farmers, and that's one of ownership. It's my gifts, my talents, my abilities, my hard work that has given me all of this. And when we have that attitude of ownership, guess what fruits we produce? The fruits of the world. Because it's about building up my kingdom rather than his. So therein lies the question, what attitude do I have? If I have an attitude of stewardship and recognize how abundantly I've been blessed by God, then I will bear the fruits of God's kingdom. If I have an attitude of ownership and think it all belongs to me, then sadly, I will only bear the fruits of my own kingdom. Second lesson these readings teach us is the importance of asking ourselves the difficult question, what are the fruits that other people see me bear? Maybe in our own minds, we think, I'm bearing the fruits of God's kingdom. I'm a good person. I go to church. I don't kill anyone. I don't steal. I'm doing what God expects. But is that what other people see? And a good way of answering the question is, what would people say about us at our funeral? You know, as a priest, I guess I have a unique perspective because I do funerals all the time. And the last few weeks ago, I had a funeral of a guy who seemed like a great guy. One of his kids stood up to give the remembrance at the beginning of Mass. And he said, my dad was a great man, and I'm going to remember the things he was most passionate and loved in life the most. The ravens, crabs, and beer. Now, I love crabs and beer as much as the next guy. The ravens, not so much. But is that really what we want to be remembered for? And that's a sobering question. Because if someone was giving our eulogy today, what would they remember us for? Crabs and beer? Would they remember us for our generosity, our compassion, our empathy, our kindness, our service? What people see in us are the gifts we're bearing. And while it may seem kind of morbid, it's a sobering thought to think, what would people say about me at my funeral? And if we don't like the answer to that question, then that's a good indication we need to make some changes. To put our time and energy not into the things of the world, but into the things of God. So that people will see the fruits we're trying to bear, and that's what we can be remembered for. And finally, the third lesson is it's not just about what we do, it's about what we fail to do. As Catholics, we call these sins of omission. The things I didn't do, but that I should have done. That person in my family who was having a bad day and struggling, but I totally ignored them. That person at the office who needed my help or a shoulder to cry on, but I was too busy myself. Those things, those fruits of God's kingdom that we should have done, but failed to do. And I think for all of us, in our fast-paced world, this is a good one to think about. Because how easy it is for all of us to get so wrapped up in what I got to get done, what I got to get accomplished, what I need to do, that we miss the needs of others, literally right around us. And my friends, God expects us to do those acts of charity as well. Those things I failed to do, but should have done. And maybe the readings today are a good wake-up call to shift the focus not so much from me, but to others. To not so much worry about my needs, my wants, my feelings, my desires, but what about those people all around me, maybe that I live with, work with, or go to school with, that are suffering and need me to minister to them? The things that we should have done, but failed to do. The readings today are a wake-up call. A wake-up call not to make the same mistake that the tenant farmers do. To recognize how abundantly God has blessed us, and to ask the challenging but difficult question, am I using all those blessings to produce the fruits God expects from me? Most of you sitting here today probably don't remember the name of Alfred Nobel from history. He's actually the inventor of dynamite. And one day, Alfred Nobel opened up the morning paper over breakfast and saw his own obituary sitting there. Another man who shared his name had died, and the papers got the obituaries mixed up. And he read his obituary about all the millions he had made, how his invention of dynamite had been used to develop this type of artillery to win that battle or that war. When he closed the paper, he thought, this is my legacy. This is what I'm going to be remembered for. And that moment, he had a conversion experience. And the very next day, he took all of his millions and established the Nobel Peace Prize, so that the fruits of his life would not be war, destruction, and wealth, but peace and challenging others to work towards that. My friends, this gospel today is our Alfred Nobel wake-up call, to look at our lives and to ask ourselves, what are the fruits we're bearing, and how will I be remembered? And if we don't like the answer to that question, then the reminder is we need to change. Just like Alfred Nobel, to shift gears, to shift directions. Because the readings today remind us God has high expectations, and He's given us everything we need to accomplish those expectations. But the question is, are we using those gifts wisely to bear the fruits that others will see, and the fruits, most importantly, that God will see?